Finance, would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and ask our representative from the Pension Board. Brian, can you lead us in the pledge, please?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Vahey. I'm going to ask everybody a moment of personal privilege. The extended Board of Finance family has had some health issues recently, and I just want to have a moment of silence and everybody send their good thoughts to our family members who are battling illness, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. On tonight's agenda, we have 7 items. And the first item is to approve minutes from our budget hearings. We broke them up into 3 different blocks, I think. Isn't that right, Caitlin? Tonight, we're just going to approve the first 5. Then we'll do the next 5 at the next meeting, and then the next 5 at the following meeting. Subsequent to that, we'll review the current status of the town's pension funds. We obviously do this on a quarterly basis, and that's why Mr. Vahey's here. Thank you for being here this evening. Next item is the Board of Education financial position versus the budget through the third quarter of fiscal year 13. Next is the town's financial position versus the budget as of the third quarter fiscal year 13. The fifth item, review updates to the internal service fund. Again, this is something we typically do in the last 2 quarters of the year, and this time the last 3 quarters of the year to understand where that fund balance is. The fourth is to review a calendar item for next week. I've had a request and I want to speak to the board about it. And the 7th item is any other communications. One item on here that I think is missing on this agenda, but again, it's under review. There's going to be no action taken this evening, is the status of what's going on with the fire pension investigation and where that stands. I think it's there's been a report issued. It's gone to the Fire Commission and the Board of Selectmen. I want to make sure that we're looped in as to where that is. Any questions, comments, concerns from board members at this time? Okay, seeing none, let's go to item number 1, which is the approval of the minutes. Is there any issue for anyone if we approve them through 1 vote as opposed to 5 votes?
The only thing is people are absent.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Is there anybody that were absent?
He goes here on the 7th.
Okay, so we'll have to do it one at a time then. Thank you, Mr. Polito. Okay, so first item, to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Board of Finance from January 8th, 2013. Questions, comments, concerns from board members? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting these minutes? Those opposed or abstentions? There's 1 abstention, Mr. Walsh, and those minutes carry. To approve the minutes of the quarterly meeting of the Board of Finance held on January 30th, 2013. Questions, comments, concerns from board members on these minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting these minutes? Opposed? Abstentions? There's 1 abstention, Mrs. Albin. All right. To approve the minutes of the budget hearing of the Board of Finance from February 5th, 2013. This was a budget hearing meeting. Questions, comments on this item? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting these minutes? Opposed? Abstentions? That carries unanimously. Okay. We'll go to the approval of the minutes for the budget hearing of the Board of Finance from February 7th, 2013. Any questions, comments, concerns on this? We can. Mrs. Albin, do you want to, let's have Mrs. Albin move them all, if that's okay. Mr. Walsh, can you second them all? Okay. All in favor of accepting these minutes? 7th, all in favor of these minutes? Oh, do you have a question, comment? Are you voting? Okay, all in favor? I couldn't tell. There was kind of a half hand raised. Opposed? Abstentions? We have 2 abstentions on those items, Mr. Brown and Mr. Bolito. To approve the minutes of the budget hearing of the Board of Finance from February 19th, 2013. Let me ask a question here for one item on this. Let's make sure, do we have these dates right on these budget? They are. Okay, these are, and these are, what's confusing me is they say budget hearing meetings, and most of our budget hearing meetings I thought were March. So that's why I'm questioning whether these are right. I just want to make sure of that. The dates are right. Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns on the February 19th minutes? Okay. All in favor of these minutes? Opposed, abstentions? There's one abstention, Mr. Walsh, on those. Just wanted to, I read through the minutes. I wasn't sure of the dates. So, okay. Item number 2, to review the current status of the town's pension fund. Mr. Vahey, please come on up. We'll have, and Mr. Tetra, if you want to join him, feel free. And I know Mr. Mayor's here, and he also serves on the pension board. Thank you for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
All right, I'll turn it right over to you.
You guys, does everyone have the
The Callan report.
Callan report from March 1st? We, as far as changes or things that are being implemented currently at the on the board, we had to modify our investment policy statement to slightly adjust our targets, being that next quarter you will see the domestic equity go down to 2 managers and some index type funds. We're shifting a lot of our large cap equity management to, or it's not being managed, it'll be more passive, and we will just have our small cap and mid cap managed actively. So that was recently done, as well as the transition plan to actually shift out of the managers and into the passive strategy, which takes some maneuvering because of the numbers involved, number of positions. Also,
Reason for the change.
the reason
Yeah,
primarily to save money, and we're not really getting any.
So they're not performing a lot better than the passively managed, and we're incurring additional fees for them, right?
Which is, I think, pretty much across the board in the space. It's large caps. It's tough to outperform consistently over a long time period, and it just makes it easier from a monitoring perspective. And also, it's saving us, I believe, I think the number was about $500,000 in fees. So.
Okay.
Brian, have you determined which funds you're going to be letting go? For?
We have. I don't have the notes in front of me, but because of these companies here, some of them do not. They are small cap and mid cap. Like Boston Company's a small mid. I believe Jennison is our other small mid. So I believe the Iridian is definitely one that's going to be gone. And I don't know if we're taking all the money from Columbus Circle. I'd have to check on the notes, but I do know Boston and Jennison are remaining. And it's, as far as allocation of monies, you'll see that there's still an overweight domestic equity. That's going to change as we shift to the new managers, and the money gets redistributed in the passive. Actually, it's going to be ETFs and the small cap managers, and then we're waiting for the capital call on the private equity with Mesero's private equity fund to fund. It has not closed, so we have not funded the several $1 million mandate that will be down there in the private equity bucket. And I believe we just got some capital calls, or we're looking at our in the real estate space too. That number will fluctuate as well. So I mean and also we've had outflows to actually pay benefits, and so we took one slug out of domestic fixed. Well, there's another change that occurred last time we were here. GSAM had money. They took over a fund that we previously had. We were not enamored with necessarily GSAM being the manager in the fixed income space, so it got moved to the U.S. Montgomery fixed income. So there was a transition period, and some monies also got paid out of domestic fixed to pay benefits last quarter. So that's about it as far as asset distribution. As far as performance, just like hopefully everyone's 401k and private investments, it's been a good 12 months in the equity markets, and since the pension is about a 60-40 split, equities and fixed income, it's reflecting that. You'll see, I guess the best way to actually look is on page 3, where it puts everything together for return for periods. You'll see fiscal year, we're up 11.8. Last 12 months, 9.1. Year to date, 4.6. Commodities, just like the market is down a little bit. Everything else is sort of performing in line with what we expected.
Any questions? Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vahey, on the hedge funds, I noticed that the rate of return is about 6.5, which is, certainly not bad. But given the level of risk that's typically associated with the hedge funds, is that a sufficient rate of return to justify the inherent risk in that type of investment?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about the purpose of a hedge fund. It's not to score, Stevie Cohen 30% returns. Like, we're not in. We truly are using them as a vehicle that's, although some are better than others, you hope to get like a hedged return, which means they're giving up some of the upside for principal protection on the downside. So I wouldn't expect to see them outperforming the overall market, and then any of those that do, like Stevie Cohen's SAC got clobbered when they had the downturn. So we prefer the guys that we have here. There's a lot of long short. So by definition, they'll show you what the return of the market is, and they'll be, they're like 2/3 of that because they're basically getting hindered by their shorts. They're not all of them are panning out, especially in a market where most everything's rising. But on the flip side, hopefully they have the sectors and individual names picked out that sort of give a buffer on the way down. Same thing in the fund. We have a long short. The diversified one is a mix of different strategies, has distressed and stuff like that in there. So Pequot we're out of. Canadas is also sort of a long short type of strategy. So those numbers are sort of, that's, we'd always like more, but they're not out of line. Where we would start to get concerned is if these guys actually start printing negative numbers when it's, or something that's adverse to the strategy that they're doing, and then that means that either they're poorly managed or they're not doing what they said they're doing. So that's kind of what we keep an eye on those guys.
And obviously, if the hedge funds are significantly outperforming your other investments, that would be a red flag to you too, I would imagine, given what we've been through.
That's correct, although that was the darn pernicious thing about Madoff. Well, kind of hid underneath the radar, but yes, no, all of our managers are registered under the new guidelines that were issued, and we only selected ones that really give us complete transparency and know what they're doing. We get, matter of fact, all of us get weekly emails for Canadas, which fills up the inbox, but yeah, we like it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Is there any particular area that you guys are focused on or concerned about right now, or anything that's paying particular attention to right now?
No, I think is no different than, like I said, everybody else than their own personal investments. When you look at where interest rates are, you look at the fixed income portion of the portfolio, and I would say a fixed income's priced to perfection, right? You're not going to get any more capital gain in your as a fixed income manager. I mean, rates are where they are, so we don't try and time the market per se, so you still see a 60-40, but I will say that if there's, for some reason, there's money that needs to be taken out or readjustment, I don't think there's any rush to really overweight fixed income in this given environment. And that's, so now you go and you look at the durations of the fixed income managers, because they're active managers, and they are all attempting to be nimble around the current, interest rate environment. So, But that
What
would be the biggest one, I would say.
Okay, so with the funds tracking pretty well this year, congratulations on that. With the diversification of the assets, which it's good to see that you're actually, if you're not at the targets, you're very close to the targets and taking steps to do that. So that's all good news. One of the things that came up during our budget process was a more active managerial role for the pension boards, and I'll defer to Mr. Tetro here, related to the OPEB assets, which are obviously a much smaller asset pool right now. But what's going on with that? Because there's obviously assumptions built into the actuarial reports when we fund that trust fund every year. So where do we stand with that, management of that?
We, at the last meeting, an IPS, if you will, for that has to be established, which decisions were made on, as well as selection of, it's not going to be as complex a strategy because it just doesn't have enough money to, we can't diversify it like this because there's just not enough dollars. And so what Callan proposed and we agreed with was really where we could piggyback with existing managers, where they will allow a smaller account size because we have the other dollars. We've done that, so it's definitely a fixed income equity split. You're not going to get any hedge fund exposure or commodity mandate or private equity or those type of alternate investments. But the rest have been farmed out because it was all fixed income. So they're shifting away from the current manager, and I do not believe that fixed income manager is going to be in place going forward. It was more of a short-term fixed income shop, and also there was a change in management recently. So significant change in management. Somebody had been there for forever. So the decision was go to with names that we'd already selected and were familiar with. So that
Have those
was
funds
just
been
decided the
transferred?
last. No, it just. I mean, the meeting was it was last week, right?
What's the expectation on rate of return then? If it's obviously a smaller portfolio, more limited exposure, do you guys know?
I'm sure Callan has something modeled, but I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Just as a point of further information, the allocation was 30% debt, 30% world equity, ex-US, and 40% domestic equity. So it's a 70-30 balance instead of the normal 60-40.
Okay, but do we know what the targets are? Do we know if the funds haven't been moved yet? We don't know. What I'm trying to get to is in the actuarial reports of OPEB, the calculation of OPEB, there's a certain rate of return. And as I recall, the rate of return in OPEB was actually judged to be higher than the rate of return in the pension fund. If you have less flexibility with the funds, you have less opportunity to invest, less money, no opportunity with the hedge funds. Some of those items, I'd like to know what the rate of return we're expecting is going to be on that.
Yeah, I don't remember the Hooker and Holcomb details in OPEB, but I mean that they use the same. They need to be given an asset allocation, and from that they use the same kind of historical approach to projecting returns.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure, given that it was 100% fixed income, how they came up with any kind of a.
I think they used 8%, actually. I think they were using a more aggressive rate of return on the OPEB than they were on pension. That was,
Yeah,
I think so.
all I remember is that the liabilities were there's aggressive assumptions in the liabilities as well as far as rate of
growth.
leveling out of 5%. I do not remember the asset part. And given that we don't have a lot of assets, your liability part of the equation is. But I mean, yeah,
Well, there's
it should come in line. It should. I mean, it will be a lower. Actually, with 70-30 equity fixed income, it may actually be a similar number to the 7% range, 7 to 7.5. But the volatility will be much higher because
Yeah,
there's
and
not a lot of diversification.
And as I recall, the rate of return that was expected, and to your point is absolutely right, they were also assuming a higher asset base, right, than what we had. The rate of return was more aggressive, and in fact, I believe it was more aggressive than on the pension side. And you're absolutely correct related to the liabilities because I think they were going out at a 5% increase per year for 5 years, and then they were flatlining it from that
At 5.
point forward. Right. So what I've always said is my bigger concern from a long-term liability standpoint for the town was on the OPEB side versus the pension side. Not that the pensions, you know, we're obviously seeing growth there, but you guys have a $300 million balance and you're managing it. But on the OPEB side, we're at a much smaller balance, much more exposed, and the assumptions are much more aggressive on both sides.
Right, you start funded in one, and you're not funded.
Right.
You're trying to fund on an ongoing basis and save for the future, which is a more challenging proposition with OPEB.
Right. Can we please,
We-
for the
we should
next quarterly meeting,
have the OPEB thing.
can we get the OPEB stuff as well? And if we could, at the pleasure of my colleagues, I'd like to hear more on the OPEB side at our next quarterly meeting than on the pension side this next time, if we could. Just to see where you guys are and how we're managing that. And I know, by the way, I want to thank you for all, you and your colleagues for all your hard work on this. This is in no way, this is something that's been, for lack of a better way to put it, thrown into your laps in terms of helping to manage the trust fund, and we appreciate your efforts on that. And we obviously had to build up some type of balance there over the last couple of years in order to give you something to manage. But I think we do need to take a look at this. Does anybody have any follow-up questions or thoughts, or think I'm all wet on this, or what? No? You guys good? Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Two comments. One comment on the OPEB. Obviously, if you have almost no assets, the rate of return on the assets is almost immaterial to the equation. In fact, it is immaterial to the equation.
It would be if the report assumes that you don't have any assets, but as I recall, the
Well,
report
no, the
doesn't
report
assume
is
that.
based upon actual assets.
Let's check that.
The second comment is just as an information piece. We discovered recently that the recoveries from the Madoff lawsuits have been accounted for as contributions to the plan instead of return on investment. So the next time you see one of these
In the
reports,
pension plan.
the pension plan, next time you see one of these reports, the report will be adjusted upward for that activity.
You know, the monies came in, they sat in cash, and actually were used to pay out benefits, but the reality is you know, the money didn't come from the
Right.
the beneficiaries. It was recovery, so it should account to the return numbers.
A fair point, and the point is that any Madoff funds that are recovered come back directly into the pension plans. They never go into the town's general fund or anything like that. And any legal expenses on that side are paid out of the pension fund, not through the town's general fund, correct?
Correct.
Right.
One other item that it's just for the Board of Finance, I believe. The last time we talked about actuarial assumptions, and we talked about you know, the experience study, which we care a lot about, but there's talk about of unfinished, and we talked about briefly at our meeting as well, but it's not really something we were going to pay for, but it was the
Sensitivity analysis?
asset liability matching. Yeah, which embedded in that would be the ability to tweak assumptions. So you guys, however you know, if you want to change rate of salary increases or whatnot, and the impact that would have on future payments, and
Right.
so you might want to. I don't know where that sits on a tickler, but you at least the next time we have the actuaries.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? All right. Mr. Vahey, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate your time. All right, moving on, we'll go to review the Board of Education financial position versus budget as of the third quarter, fiscal year 13. I see the chairperson of the Board of Education is here, Mr. Dwyer. If you want to come forward, come on up. Nah, we don't have, it's a standing room only crowd tonight, so I had to pick you out. Come on up in case there's any questions. Any questions, anybody? We've got a nice report put together. Mr. Dwyer, any areas of concern for you as you and your board reviewed the financial report for the year?
The opening sentence that says,
Yeah, you need to come up to the microphone, please. Sorry.
I like the opening sentence that said, net will be on budget.
Okay. So what about our capital budget for the year, is that going to be spent? I think last year it wasn't completely spent, correct? Is that?
Well, again, pluses and minuses will be on budget. If you're asking, will there be a net at the end of the time, it's too early for us to project that.
Okay, so on the last page, it's saying the capital budget of 1.2 has been expended or encumbered. Okay. Where do we stand? Remind me, Mr. Tetra, where do we stand with the Osborne Hill PCB issue? What are next steps? Do we have any next steps we need to take with that? I don't believe we do, but I just wanted to. Just want to see where we stand now. Is any update on that project or whatever?
The Osborne Hill project has had a building committee assigned and set up.
Yep.
So they're proceeding on with both the Windows installation and the mitigation projects of that.
Yep. Now, that's a capital side of it, right? Has there been any other
Correct.
costs associated since the finalization that we went through? I mean, are we clean, the testing? There's been no other new information on that?
The project that we approved in January,
Yep.
that's the kind of the project plan we're proceeding on.
Right.
So no new information other than what we plan to do there. So from that standpoint, we're on track.
Okay.
There are phases in that, and I don't believe we've made a decision in terms of, say, the exact disposition of the gym and what's going
Right.
to take place there. So we just haven't gotten to that phase of the project
Right.
yet.
The
Right. That's
test,
kind of what I was asking, right?
yeah, the test results that we've had to do, kind of following up on that, have not produced a new surprise, if that's
So
also what
everything's
you're asking.
proceeding as it was anticipated that it would proceed as it relates to Osborne Hill at this point?
Yeah, so at this point, there may be, for lack of a better term, updates later in the project,
Yeah.
but at this point, nothing has changed from the plan and as proposed back in January.
Got it. Does anybody have any questions on either the report or Osborne Hill? Mr. Brown?
On the report, on pupil personnel expense, we're showing a negative 492,000, right? So the last reimbursement states, well, it states in here that it'll come in May.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra.
Right. You figure it'll cover all the costs?
Again, I focus on the opening sentence that would net, and also at the end of the year, we do make those line item adjustments necessary to cover different lines based on those that went over and under.
So the answer is yes.
To your question of,
The question I just asked.
that we'll balance them out, each of the line items will balance out.
Okay. So we'll get the cost reimbursement at the end of May. That'll cover those line items, and it'll balance out to zero.
The cost reimbursement, plus if there's any overages or unders, then that will also be part of it, I would imagine.
Any other questions? Mr. Dwyer, I don't want to put you on the spot, but while we have you here,
You
I already
are.
did that, right?
You have effectively done
Teaches you
that.
for showing up. No. One of the items we're going to discuss later in the meeting is a potential shift of our meeting next week. Now, the reason for that shift is a project that's going to be before the Board of Selectmen tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's the Ludlow window and renovation project.
Renovation, classrooms, and roof and stuff.
Okay,
yeah.
we have not heard much about that project. I remember the window part of it quite some time ago. That kind of went away. Then it's being rolled back into the roof, the windows, and renovation, and some cafeteria, some sizing issues.
Yes.
Correct, some enrollment issues. That's leapfrogging, I guess, the Riverfield, which I've heard a lot more about in recent times. But can you tell us from the Board of Education's perspective, both of those projects are coming down the pike, and your hope is that they get through the Board of Selectmen and reach us shortly, correct?
Yes.
Okay, is one of greater priority than the other, or what's?
Which of my children do I like best?
Yeah, pretty much.
I can only give you my personal answer.
Yeah,
Because the board certainly has not put a priority over one versus the other.
Okay,
This year's freshman class, by the time they're seniors, we're going to have to find 400 more seats for high school students. And so in terms of pressing need to have a seat for each child, certainly the Ludlow project is important. But Riverfield has had roughly 7 years of, we're going to get to you eventually, and it is
Right.
part of our overall plan to go from 65 portables down to 0, and we have 15 left, so that is also an important plan. I don't think you can say one over the other. Our board has not done that. Both are important to the board.
I just wanted to get on the table while we had you here, since this, we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about this
Yeah.
later, that my expectation was that we would have heard Riverfield first, only from where it was in the project cycle, right?
Yeah.
But this, Ludlow's coming first because it was ready to be presented first. But in the next couple of months, the expectation is we're going to have both these projects before us. Is that
Correct. Yeah.
one perhaps next
Yeah,
week?
and
then-
again, it all depends on the schedule, and if the Board of Selectmen needs more answers to questions on the Ludlow project, and suddenly they need more time to consider it, all these things kind of, yes, they do hopscotch, but in part that's depending on the amount of questions that are asked and the information that's
Right.
available at the meeting.
Right. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on that? Does everyone understand what's going on with that? I just wanted to lay that out since that is coming before us, perhaps, shortly. Anybody else?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Did you use that word, hopefully?
So perhaps.
Oh.
Any other questions, comments from board members on the Board of Education through the third quarter? Thank you, and thank you for
Thank you
coming.
very much.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Okay. To review the town's financial position versus the budget through Q3, this is item number 4 on the agenda. We have Mr. Mayor here, and also, obviously, the first selectman is still here, so
Question I had on the Board of Ed side, but it's actually a town question.
feel free, Mrs. Leclerc.
And that is, sorry. On the Board of Ed thing under the roof for Ludlow, it said it's fully covered under the town's deductible. Did the town have to pay out money under the deductible? Or
Yeah, I think we're paying $100,000 on that.
100? And that comes from the town side?
Yes.
Okay.
Where on the town side budget is that coming from?
Risk management account.
So it's coming out of the insurance on the risk management account, 100,000, to cover the deductible for the insurance on the school side.
That's correct.
Okay. Questions? Mrs. Leclerc, any follow-up on that?
That was it, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. I'm going to just approach this through the use of the variance analysis report, the one-pager. The updated one-pager that went out at 7 minutes beyond the deadline.
Okay.
But we tried. Thank you. Thank you. Starting at the top, the bond sale premium, total bond sale premium for the bond sale of July 12th, 2012 was $2,971,000. There was a budget at $320,000 of bond premium, so the favorable variance is $2,651,000. That amount can be utilized over a 3-year period, no more than a 3-year period, to reduce debt service. And on this schedule, $1 million of that $2.6 million is allocated towards the debt service. You may recall in fiscal year 14, you may recall that the Board of Selectmen reduced the debt service budgeted payment amount by 500,000, which this board then passed on, leaving it as it was, that 500,000. So this, I don't want to say anticipates, but I guess anticipates might be the right word, that given the results we show here, that the RTM may choose to reduce the debt service. They certainly have the opportunity to, based upon these numbers, to reduce the debt service by an additional 500,000.
So this is an adjustment that you will be passing along to the RTM that they might make to debt service for fiscal year 2014 of an additional $500,000 in budgeted
Correct.
expense being pulled out of the budget.
Correct.
And this is based on the current projection of the utilization of the bond premium in the current fiscal year.
Right. Tied in with everything else here on this page.
Right.
Right.
And this is a number that's gone back and forth several times between 500 and $1 million, because originally it was thought to be $1 million, and it was taken back down to 500,000.
Yeah, and basically, correct statement. You know, if you compare, you know, the board of, the finance department, as you may or may not know, depending on if you remember some of the things you read during the budgetary process, it's the smallest staff of any town in Connecticut with a budget of $200 million or more. And for towns of 51 to 80, it's in the bottom quintile of staff size. So there's a lot of activity through the budget process. People have been very, very busy. So we sent out even the document Friday, which this was then updated this morning, as I was doing some reviewing over the weekend and playing with some numbers. So that's why you got a new thing this morning. So the one that went out Friday actually only had 500,000. And then this one has, so to answer your question, that's a long answer to yes.
Right, right. And my question wasn't meant to be critical at all. It's just that this number is not an exact science, is what I'm saying right now.
You got that right.
All right. Okay.
Okay, the video competition, that number is pretty solid, the 130 variance. It's, you know, that's realized. It's in the bank, so to speak. Same with, not so to speak, it's actually in the bank. Same with the municipal revenue share and the pilot non-for-profit. The prior year levy tax sale favorable variance of 527 is per the cash, per the munis system cash flow, and it reconciles with the cash. What we have not actually reconciled this with the tax collector QDS reports, which is something we're going to start doing going forward. Unemployment comp, as you know, has been improved. The investment income number, that assumes there will be no degradation in the mark-to-market portion between March 30 and June 30. That mark-to-market, given where interest rates have been this last month, has probably actually improved a little bit. The next item, Storm Sandy equipment uses and fully loaded fringe. I don't want to get too redundant here or too basic, but I don't know how else to describe it. As everyone knows, we have Storm Sandy expenditures, and for the majority of those expenditures, we bill a 75% reimbursement. Expenditures include fully loaded for straight time. And we had straight time expenses at DPW. So for straight time set with salary and wages, you can bill for your fully loaded benefits. So your fully loaded benefits includes health care, FICA, Medicare, sick pay, vacation pay, retirement, OPEB. All of those numbers get thrown in. Okay? So our reimbursement application includes fully loaded benefits for the straight time at 103%. Okay? Additionally, as you may remember, the use of our equipment that we owned is reimbursed by FEMA on an hourly rate. Okay, so there's monies that we recover that we don't really spend. So we have, say you have $1 million, just take an example, say you have a department that's got $1 million budget, or that spent $1 million on FEMA. You expect $750,000 of that to come back from FEMA. If you spend on Sandy, expect $750,000 to come back from FEMA, and you have that $25,000 cost share that's our share. A significant percentage of that we have asked the individual departments to absorb in their operations for the year. So that's absorbed. In addition to that, you have the fully loaded fringe and you have the equipment uses income, and that 687 is the aggregation of those three numbers, those three components.
So the 687 represents a gross up on some of the costs incurred for items that we didn't incur. It includes the fact that you're actually asking departments to save money to cover their 25% overage
Right, those three items.
they've incurred.
Fringe, department absorption, and equipment rental.
And equipment rental, which, even though we're not actually incurring the cost of renting the equipment, right? Because
It's
this
our
is-
equipment,
It's our equipment. It's our own equipment that was used to help during
right.
Sandy.
They're paying us rental.
So you allocate that to the Sandy expenses that FEMA then reimburses at 75%.
Correct.
Right. So this is upside of 687,000 if FEMA were to allow everything at
It
75%.
has a cushion in there,
It has a cushion in there. What's that cushion?
about 250,000.
Okay, so there's additional upside potential of 250.
Yeah.
So you basically are saying, if FEMA decides to disallow $250,000 worth of expenses,
Correct.
we're covered here, up to that amount. And to the extent that there's additional that they say no to, this 687 comes down.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So basically, this Storm Sandy can basically become a profit center at this point in time.
It, if you isolate Storm Sandy by itself, and I have a beautiful schedule that I could share. If you isolate Storm Sandy by itself, and if expenses weren't absorbed, then it comes in at about break even. It only becomes a profit because of the absorption of expenses.
Yes, Mrs. Leclerc? And then I go back to Mr. Walsh. as
I
he
guess
digests.
I'm not quite following. So like, when we had to go out and rent pumps, where did those costs go?
Those go under contracted equipment, but whenever that we drove the fire truck, the police car, the town dump truck, all of those, all that utilization of our resource was billed to FEMA at a scheduled rate that FEMA produces. So we
Right.
have money coming in, paying us for use of our equipment. So you have money coming in where no money went out.
Well, but we did. We bonded a huge amount of money to pay for like the rebuilding of things and our expenses for Sandy. So shouldn't it offset that? Or not we shouldn't borrow all of that money?
Mrs. Leclerc, can I take a stab at this? Because I think in a very simplified way, right? The way, to Mr. Walsh's point, that this becomes a quote-unquote profit center is the difference between incremental costs and allocated costs. There's incremental costs, for an example. Let's say there was incremental costs of $1 million. There's allocated costs of $2 million. So we're getting reimbursed at 75% of the allocated costs. And the allocated, in my example, what I just said, my allocated cost includes $1 million of the incremental plus $1 million of quote-unquote allocated, which what that means is that's costs that we would have incurred anyway, because those police, those fire, those DPW guys would have been being paid. That equipment would have been being paid for. So basically, the allocated cost to the event, and I make this number up, I'm just saying is $2 million, where the actual incremental cost of the event above what we would have incurred otherwise was $1 million. So to the extent you're getting reimbursed on the allocated costs, as opposed to just the incremental costs, you actually come out ahead of the game. Is that a fair, I just want to make sure I understand it. Is that fair? And then I'll
That
go
is
right.
partially fair.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, that is totally fair, it's totally accurate. But in addition to that, then there's also been department absorption of some of the 25%.
Right, so some of the incremental costs that you knew that we were going to have to incur that wouldn't be reimbursable, you went back to the departments and said, absorb them within your line items.
Correct.
Therefore lowering it. And now
But-
back to you.
But the reason FEMA is reimbursing us for these allocated costs is because our staff and our equipment were taken away from the normal jobs that
Yes.
they do. And so we're going to have to make that up later on in the year or at different times.
Or it
So-
doesn't get done.
or it doesn't get done. But even like equipment may have gotten damaged in the storm or used more heavily than it would normally, and we're going to have to replace that at some future date more quickly than we would have. So to me, it should, I don't know.
But it's still a positive variance in this particular counting period.
And what you point out is it's an
It's-
operating concern, not an accounting concern, right? I mean, that's the way to look at it. I mean,
Right.
it's absolutely correct. It's just not,
Right.
What
For
we had
example, if
within
you
this
drove a
period.
police car through salt water, it might wear out sooner,
Right.
need to be replaced sooner.
But I guess what I'm questioning is why is it being applied to surplus and not the appropriation that we approved?
I'm sorry,
The-
why isn't it
The
being
bond
applied to
appropriation for the FEMA expenses that we're,
Well, the bond appropriation was for infrastructure damage.
not equipment, just buildings.
Yes.
but you could do it that way. What Mrs. Leclerc is saying is, you're applying it as an offset to operating expense, to the operating costs here in the general fund. You could theoretically not spend that money here and put it towards bonding less on the
Right.
appropriation that we did on the bonding. It's a fair point, because
Well,
you're looking at.
even when you bond anything, it all comes out of the general fund.
I understand that, but you're bonding it over a 20 period of time, 20-year period of time at an interest rate, as opposed to saying, we're not going to bond $687,000 worth of stuff at a 2% or 3% interest rate. We're going to pay for it all now, cash, and not incur that cost. I mean, it's a fair point.
Right. But referencing my response to Mr. Walsh's question, if you look at FEMA by itself, it's more or less break even, and the 687 is, by itself, is absorption of costs by the departments.
Do you want to take that one? Explain that, because that makes it
Well,
sound like you had
let's say for-
687 worth of cost that you didn't need to incur, so you were able to find savings of $687,000.
No, it gets back to Mrs. Leclerc's comment and your comment in that some things that were to be done weren't done.
Give us an example.
I can't give you a specific example.
So what wasn't done that was supposed to be done that would have cost hundreds of
You know,
thousands?
it's spread out, amongst 20 departments. It's spread out, fire, police, DPW, health, finance. I mean, it's spread out everywhere.
guess you could pick one department.
Yeah. I mean, let's pick DPW. I mean, my concern is you're basically, well, you just, and I want to make sure I'm hearing you right. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No, you're not, you're hearing me right. I mean, it's DPW has had, I mean, there has been open positions in DPW. There's been like an average of 2 or something for the whole year. So there's there's $150,000 right there. Or maybe it's been 3 all year, I'm not sure. Because you cut 2 positions. I think
For
that was
next
based
year.
for next year, and that was based upon an open position report, I believe.
Okay, so
Right.
this isn't,
So what would have been possibly a variance, if you will, in vacancies has been shifted to this line item, because that's how it was absorbed.
so any operational savings across the town, you're labeling as part of this number because they were expected to make up for whatever costs they incurred as part of the
Right.
reaction to Sandy.
Correct.
Do you have that listing by department? So that'd be an interesting listing to see what they were, how that number was derived.
Basically, the way, and this gets down into the next section, actually,
Yeah.
the approach that was taken, we went to the general ledger through, March 30th, and did an analysis of how much money we had spent. The town, the departments had been aware to hold back somewhat. We went into the general ledger March 30th, we did an analysis, how much money had been spent year to date, adjusted out the encumbrances and that type of accounting activity to get
Yeah.
real operational numbers. And then we credited the 75% FEMA money reimbursement to their accounts to reduce their variance by, okay? And then we sat down and met with the department heads, the major department heads, DPW, police, fire, building, and said, okay, here's where you are, and here's how much money is left to break even. Here's the savings, let's look at the savings you've had over the year based upon open positions or whatever. And so where do you think you can then end up the year? Okay, and we did that with each of the departments.
So things like that reference librarian that was included in the budget but was never hired because that was put on hold, that goes in the 687?
There's a good question. Probably
Yeah,
not.
I'm trying to get, yeah. I'm
But
not
it's
try-
just, but.
I'm not
but-
trying to be
but
critical,
it's
I'm trying to
right. No,
understand.
no, and I understand. It's, but like the DPW number is an easier one to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
DPW, it has a very specific, because when I say it's easy one to focus on, it's because it's the biggest. Fire is just as easy, I guess, in police, because those are the 3 big ones. You pretty much, here's the cost, because I can't speak to the cost, I'd have to look at my schedule to speak to the cost of the other departments. But take DPW, they say, okay, here's where we are today, here's what our savings have been in all our items, here's what our FEMA cost was, okay, when you match it all, where do we end up?
Right. And you have a schedule that details that out that comes to the 687, pretty much?
We have a schedule that shows that number plus cushion.
Plus cushion, meaning the 250 that you
Correct.
referenced earlier. Can we just take a look at that instead of wasting a lot of time?
not-
Just,
yeah.
forward that along?
Not written, I mean, the schedule, it's a piece of many, I mean, but it's not like, here's how much comes from this department, here's how much comes from this department. It's a schedule where the total reimbursement offsetting the 25% is 900 and some odd $1,000. Subtract 250, there's your 687. So you'd have to go in and develop the schedule by, by department, because the FEMA schedule has the fringe on it, it has the cost of straight time on it, but it doesn't have the departmental savings on it that have been offset. Those would be within each department, would have to be ferreted out.
Do you have a list of that?
That's what I'm saying. Those would have to go into each department. I mean, because that was dependent. In other words, Michelangelo said, okay, this is where I am, this is where, this is, and we have our expenditures year to date.
Right.
From the accounting side, we looked at the numbers. From the operational side, we depended upon the department heads.
So the department heads told you this is how much we've saved operationally year-to-date.
We went into with the department heads, here's how much money is left, where do you think you'll come in, given this? And some of them come in at,
Are there schedules of that we could see?
yes, there are.
Cool. No, I mean, we don't need to see them tonight.
Okay, okay.
And truthfully, I'm not trying to
Yeah.
play a game of gotcha
Yeah.
or anything like
No.
that. I'm trying to understand.
So like, for example, building's going to come in at 13,000 unders, our projection. Fire's going to come at 200,000 over. And
Regardless of, and that's after FEMA, that's taking out.
that's after
Sandy.
FEMA,
And they're going to be over by 200,000?
correct.
Okay, there's an issue.
That's got some addition, that's got actually another bit of cushion in because there's a little bit of concern on my part that their FEMA reimbursable allocation is as solid as the other departments.
And the reason for that is?
They called in basically their entire staff and had them on standby during the storm, which was considered necessary for emergency purposes and the protection of the town. But that meant that some of them couldn't get home. Many of them didn't go home. They were on site 24 hours. I'm not sure that FEMA is going to pay us for the sleep time.
How many people and how many days? If we
It was,
gonna-
I can't tell you exactly, but the entire activity was a 12-day activity, 10 or 12-day activity, and they had people in for a period of time on where they called them in to be on standby.
So they called everybody
I
in.
think that is correct. Mike, do you know or not know, or?
I don't know how many days that would.
Yeah, I don't know how many days, but yeah, but and I won't say everybody, but they had people on site 24 hours a day, 48, 72, 100 hours straight on site. So they were sleeping part of the time. We're billing for 100% of the time. We're billing it as standby. This is one of the reasons, one of the benefits from having hired a consultant, because they're helping us
Yeah, right.
document
Right.
and put the best argument forward to get that fully reimbursed.
Did the police, I'm assuming since you didn't say they did, the police didn't do the same thing?
Police did not do the same thing.
And this was during the hurricane, so basically, the hurricane was coming. The decision was made to call the entire fire.
I'm not saying entire, but a lot of
You
people.
did say the entire.
Okay, I backed off on that. They called in a lot of people. There were people who stayed there 24 hours a day, for days, for several days.
They couldn't get home.
Right. And
Or didn't want to.
so they
And were
couldn't.
paid overtime.
They were paid overtime. And so that drove the $200,000 overage in the fire department.
The
It's
total
basically
number, I
overtime.
think, yeah, I think the total FEMA overtime, the fire department overtime number is about $330,000, I believe.
That's gonna be an
300
interesting top
300
burner list,
320
isn't it?
324,000.
324,000.
Right.
Is that, did all the other towns do that? I mean, is that standard?
I have no idea.
Okay. Mr. Bolito, you had your hand up, then I think I saw Ms. Leclerc. Yeah, and then Mr. Walsh. I'm sorry, I was You had my rapt attention. My apologies. Go ahead, Mr. Pillay.
This discussion we just had about the fire department dovetails into something I've been wondering about going through this whole conversation, because you mentioned the fully loaded includes health insurance, other benefits, fringe benefits. How does overtime factor into this? Is that something that FEMA reimburses, doesn't reimburse, or is that on a case-by-case basis?
Couple of comments there. They reimburse based upon the utilization overtime for the service if it was storm-related.
Okay.
Okay. But the fully allocated, but benefits for overtime are only based upon FICA and Medicare.
Okay, understood.
That 6.2 plus 1.45, I think it is. So it's the 7.65.
Right.
You can only fully allocate it to the straight time expenses.
Okay.
Total straight time expenses were 213,000.
All right.
So we allocated another 100,000 to that.
So the benefits you're working off of the straight time, but in terms of the overtime, it's based on utilization in terms of what FEMA will reimburse. Got it. Thank you.
Mrs. Leclerc, and then I'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Oh, I was just, if they're going to be over budget, are they going to come before us at some point before the end of the year? Or they're not over budget in their entire budget?
Well, at the end of the year, this board allocates and cross-allocates the funds so that the gaffer can be in balance.
But shouldn't we transfer the funds before they overspend their budget? I know traditionally we've done some cleanup,
It's
but
something
not.
that we've never done.
Yes,
but-
we have.
Oh, okay, then. It's something I'm not aware of.
Okay.
So we know right now the fire department's going to exceed their budget for the year.
Correct.
And
When we say no, we're estimating based upon the diligence and the work that's been done by the finance department in conjunction with the fire department's operational people to come up with a number. The numbers are not exact, the numbers are estimates, and in the fire department, the 191,000, 90,000 of that is a cushion against the overtime that we think might not be recoverable.
so we think that there's $90,000 worth of overtime that is being submitted to FEMA for reimbursement that is questionable because
Well, it's, when you say we,
we as a town, we're
we as
collective.
we as a town are submitting the numbers to FEMA. We have actually, in the last couple of months, or the last month or so, we've gotten more refined in the FEMA approach.
Sure.
Basically, what we've done is we've gone through and evaluated every allocation that we're billing for. And in that allocation, we say, what's the likelihood of collecting this? And we categorized them not 1 through 10 or 1 through 100, but high, medium, and low.
Yeah.
Okay. Of all the recoverable amounts that we're billing for, all of them are designated based upon our conversations with WIT and our understanding of the regulations with FEMA. All but one is designated high, are designated high. The one that's not designated high is the one in the fire department, which is designated medium.
Yeah,
The
look-
FEMA people have a higher level of confidence that we're going to get more of that money than we're putting in here as a
The
as a
FEMA
cushion.
people, meaning our FEMA advisors.
With, yes.
Right. Here, I'll speak for myself, and I
So-
just want to
so
lay
just
this out there.
Just to lay, because we're taking, because the town side is taking a conservative approach.
Yeah. My comments are in no way meant to be critical whatsoever of the finance department or your efforts or what's going on. B, we have to realize that we've gone through not one but two historic events in the last 12 months related to weather-related issues that have caused additional stress. C, there was the there was the first selectman who dealt with reducing expenses across departments to make up for the contingency cut, right? 4, we haven't gotten any of the reimbursement from FEMA yet, and we're dealing with new paperwork, new regulations, a bigger a greater problem than we've ever dealt with as relates to that before. So there's a lot of unknowns. So you factor that all in, this is a very complicated matrix, right? I get it. My comments and my questions have nothing to do with, I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, Bob, you told me it's $92,000. You know, I'm not stringing anybody up over this. What I'm trying to figure out is, are we saying that we're throwing $92,000 in here and saying reimburse us, and this was what people were paid because they were sleeping during the hours that they were in the firehouse because we had everybody in? I'm just asking the question. That's not, you know, there's no judgmental in.
I'm not taking any offense to your questions, totally, and I understand the questions.
Yeah.
And basically, you know, the fire department,
Right.
deemed to, for the protection and safety
Yeah,
of the
fine.
town,
I
felt
get it.
that it was appropriate to call people in. What I'm saying is, and I've done some of the reading of the regs,
Right.
when I'm saying, okay, we might not get that back, we, the town, are making decisions based upon this variance analysis.
Yeah.
So I don't want us to be going overboard and making decisions that we come back later and say, oh, wish we hadn't made that. So my approach here is to be conservative.
Got it. And what this number represents as 687 is not just Sandy-related stuff, but other operational adjustments that have been made to make up for the fact that we're over budget in several other areas. One of the areas we're over budget is on the firehouse side because of this $330,000 worth of overtime, right?
Right, so
That's-
instead of,
that's
like,
all.
right, and then what you'd see otherwise would be the detail of all the areas, like the vacancy reports and that type
Yeah.
of thing. And
I would love to
Yeah.
see something like that, just so that
Yeah.
I understand the number better, and I don't want to
Yeah.
create extra work. There's a 687 number here, I'd just like to see the detail on that. I'm going to shut up now, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Walsh, he's got some questions, thank you for being patient.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know, sometime within the last month, there's a schedule you produced regarding the FEMA stuff, and one of the things that stood out to me on that schedule was that there was hours listed. And I remember looking at it being, why are we listing hours? And the fire department, I remember thinking that there was some number next to the fire department that had like 6,000 and something hours. And it stood out to me because I thought it was a typo, actually. Is that the reason? Why?
I'm sorry, I'm just,
I'll go through my stuff in
I'm
my
not
office. I could talk to you
recalling-
offline about it. I don't want to delay this meeting any longer.
Yeah,
So
I'm not recalling that schedule.
we could talk offline about it.
yeah, more than happy to,
I
obviously.
remember looking at it being like this,
Yeah.
how's the other departments, a lot of the other departments, especially Public Works, was so much less. I was like, how could this number be 6,500 hours?
Well, that's a lot of hours. Well, I mean, at $100, I mean, I don't know what the overtime's at, but at $100 an hour, $324,000 is, what, 3,000 hours?
Well, how many, let's do it this way, how many firemen do we have?
100?
That's a round number I had. So if you had all 100 in for 3 days or so, right?
Yeah, adds up.
72,000 hours. Right?
Well, 7,200?
70 Did I say 72,000?
Yeah.
7,200. I meant,
Yeah.
Math is a second language, I'm sorry. 7,200 hours? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Stone. You wanna-
Hindsight's wonderful. I mean, it was a horrible storm and everything. But who authorizes the fire department to put everyone in, sleep overnight? The town, someone's got to pay for it, obviously. And we didn't, and the police didn't. The police were able to get home. And Public Work, I assume, got home. It doesn't, it's bothering me.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, I don't know if you're looking for an answer, but as Mr. Flynn indicated, I mean, this was an emergency.
Yeah.
It's public safety is an issue, and the chiefs make their decisions as how to, I can't even tell you, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and these people were knocking on people's doors, making them get out of their homes, they were ferrying people out, they were turning off gas lines, I mean, there was a lot of activity.
I realize that, but if there was a fire, like on my street, you couldn't get the fire department down there anyway. But I'm just saying, it's just bothering me that we're paying all this overtime for the fire department, and yet the police department somehow was able to manage, Public Works was able to manage, and it seems like it's always the fire department that we have these problems. Maybe I'm wrong, but it certainly appears that way.
Yeah, police overtime was 240,000,
How much?
240,
Right, is that all storm related?
yes.
And the fire department was what?
324,000,
Oh, all right. Never mind.
so 33% more.
What kind of, again, what kind of postmortem is done on a storm? Lessons learned? What happens from that? Do we know what other towns did? Do we know, I mean, what was DPW's overtime?
We say, what were they doing at the time?
No, how much did they spend on overtime? I'm just trying to figure out, this is the first that, I'll speak for myself, this is the first I've heard of any of this. Have you guys heard any of this?
No.
So this is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, in essence, it's the first everybody's heard, Mr. Chair, because this is coming out of the FEMA kind of cost accumulation, looking at what costs it operationally on that side.
I'm assuming somebody knew that we had the entire, the majority of the fire
Again,
department in, no?
My caution would be, I wouldn't
I'm
Mis-
reacting to what I'm being told.
understand, and my caution would be, don't overreact to the words
I'm not
just yet.
overreacting. Yep. But go ahead. What's going on with the postmortem? What's happening?
We did a debriefing. We did go out and look at what other towns did. That was kind of prior to accumulating all this. We did that from an operational standpoint.
Yeah.
So same thing, type of thing that we did after Irene.
Yeah,
So we looked for operationally what things we did well, what things we could do better.
right.
Deputy Chief Reed actually gave a presentation to the Board of Selectmen on that and stepped through kind of what our lessons learned were. And we update
Did this
our...
come up in that presentation to the Board of Selectmen?
These numbers weren't compiled at that time, so we didn't have that size. So some of the stuff that's coming out of here are lessons learned in terms of, as we look at the costs, we're going to go back and look at what we did operationally. And again, this was a hurricane. This was the worst storm since 1938. So at the time, we were going door to door through the beach area,
Sure. Yeah,
looking for people that hadn't gotten out and may not have survived.
Sure.
So there was a lot of detail work going through on that level. We brought in, when you look at police not going through quite as much overtime, remember we brought in National Guard, and they supplemented our police force going through that. So we didn't need, literally to give our police officers a break in terms of going through that. So that there are lessons learned throughout all of this, and I know we can, we'll take advantage of that going forward. But the FEMA report here is giving us a whole other level of understanding on the accounting side or the financial side in terms of what these decisions are.
Any questions, comments on this? Yeah, right.
In answer to your earlier question, the Department of Public Works overtime was 162,000.
163, okay. Mr. Bolito? Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Tetro, you mentioned that there was essentially a postmortem report delivered to the Board of Selectmen. Now that we have some of the financial information, is there any intention of delivering an updated or a final postmortem to this board at some point in the future? Or is
Well-
this pretty much what we're getting?
From a financial standpoint, that's what
Right.
you're getting. From a standpoint of taking this back and consolidating it, absolutely.
Okay,
And we want to
good.
bring that back, because we want to take that, there are two levels, and the danger in any of this stuff is, when the hurricane's hitting, you don't want somebody sitting there saying, well, we can save $10 if we don't call in a couple of folks,
Right.
all right? Because
Understood.
you're not sure, again, and having lived through it, I know we all did, but living through it in the Emergency Operations Center, you're not sure what's happening outside.
Yep.
It's a little bit, and Mr. Vay's left, so I'll use submarine analogy since it's a little bit like, you're in a submarine, you're going forward, but you can't see what's happening outside. So you're getting reports. It's at that 8 o'clock Monday night when the wind's picked up, and all of a sudden the phone starts ringing off the hook. There are 3 cars with trees down on them with people in the cars potentially, and there's a lot that you think you know, but you're not sure in terms of what's taking place.
No, that's understood.
So from that standpoint, there's a caution. In terms of can we do it better if we did some things that we overdid them, or certainly we're going to go back and look at that and look at 2 levels. Operationally, what did we do from a cost standpoint? Are there things we can do better within the realm of not being penny wise and pound foolish? But the second level is this is our most significant FEMA expense and exposure and experience through this. So we are learning, because of the consultants that are here, we're going through this and learning more about how FEMA reimburses, what they do, what they don't, all the way through this. So we're learning a lot more, and we'll be able to incorporate that into our procedures and policies on even smaller storms going forward, because we'll understand that more. But certainly on larger events like this.
Right. And that's why I think the postmortem is important for this board, because obviously we have to consider the financial ramifications and, what planning we need to do in terms of bolstering our reserves and things like that. But just, it's almost like this is kind of becoming the new normal, and you almost have to kind of prepare for these type of events. I mean, we've been hit back-to-back years. You're obviously not expecting a Hurricane Sandy every year, but you also can't prepare as if there's not going to be another Hurricane Sandy either. There has to be some balance there. So that's why I'm glad to hear that we'll get a final report, not just the financial end of it, but the operations end, so that we can do what we need to do to make sure that we're ready the next time something like this hits. Thank you. You're back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Okay, any other questions on the 687, the impact of Sandy? What's going on the finance side? Mrs. Leclerc, you start off with the questions on this. Any good? Anybody else? You want to continue down that list?
Next section is unfavorable. First line item is reserved for current year levy assessments. This is a combination of realized and estimated assessment adjustments. The debt service interest, with the bond issue, even though we got the premium, that also resulted in higher interest, initial higher interest, so we had a negative on the debt service interest, $130,000.
So that's the excess cost due to taking the bond premium.
Well, I won't say total, that's just difference from budget. That's
Right.
all I can say.
So it was budgeted at one interest rate. We agreed to a little bit of a higher interest rate and got the $2.9 million in bond premium. Right?
Yeah, it wasn't like, the decision on the bond sale, the way the process works is an auction.
Right.
And people come in, you just take the one that's got the lowest yield. And all of the bidders had significant bond premiums. Right. And in talking to bond counsel, they like to pay you the money up front because it makes the interest rate look higher, and I don't understand
They get to report higher earnings.
Yeah, so I don't know what they do. Probably has something to do with all the derivative activity, et cetera. The next item is operations. As you can see, there's the revenue piece. Pieces are detailed. Golf revenue is anticipated to be down. Penfield revenue down, 120,000. Beach stickers down. Parking, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a budget issue or whatever, but is up, anticipated to be up. Police parking revenue is down. That, I think, I understand, has to do significantly with the opening of the Metro Center. There's not many tickets being given out at the Fairfield train station. Library fines are down maybe because of the leased hours. People aren't borrowing books. I have no idea. The sewer assessment revenue, we've talked about this. The town has billed the sewer assessment account $72,000. But but to bring the assessment revenue, the assessment liabilities into balance with the debt service, the town needed to forego this. And then the net expense overage for all the departments, like the fire department, like we talked about, the police department, TP&Z, tax collector, et cetera. The net of the overages is $122,000, and that makes up the $516,000 negative. The reserve for other anticipated expenses has gone up since the last time because of some contract settlements. NEMO, the cost to NEMO after reimbursement looks to be $152,000, which gives us the total variable minus the total favorable minus the total unfavorable of, and after allocating $1 million of the bond premium to future debt service payments, gives us an estimated variance net of $513,000. And then when you combine that to the budgeted contribution to surplus of $500,000, would, if all this by some stroke of serendipity turned out to be correct, we would have an estimated contribution to surplus of $1,013,000 and 12 cents.
12 cents.
It's a rigorous analysis, gentlemen.
The only thing that's guaranteed on this is that the number won't be 513, right? Questions, Mrs. Albin?
Quickly, on the first three items under fiscal year operations, golf revenue, Penfield revenue, which probably won't move, but beach stickers. Will the beach stickers and the golf revenue perhaps move toward the good as we start to enter into the spring outdoor recreation season by fiscal year end?
This is the estimate of the total, what it will be at the end of the year. And what I really don't know, which I should know, and I apologize. No, I take that back. I do know. There will be some recoveries from the insurance companies for some of this, but it's not booked into this year because I don't know when we're going to get it.
So then my follow-up on those two items, did somebody make poor estimates for this?
Yeah, these estimates are the same as the expense estimates. Sat down, and in fact, if you ever sit down with Jerry Lombardo, he's got more financial numbers than we have in the finance department. He's got binders, and he's got every one of his programs pretty much detailed out, and he has a good track, good historical track, and he goes through and he can, he takes the Munis information. He has a lady, Jan, who works there on the numbers with him. They do an excellent job tracking all this stuff. And then based upon the historical and based upon the year-to-date activity, this is their estimate of where they'll end up the year.
Okay, I mean, it's harder to determine why library fines are down, but we should be able to determine why revenue in these two areas are down, because these are things that residents use in this town.
Well, I mean, Penfield is pretty obvious.
So do we have fewer
because-
people getting beach stickers, and we have fewer people using the golf course?
Well, we had a storm. We had a big storm, and Penfield is down, and there were...
Right, I'm not talking about Penfield.
Well, it's one of, you said the top three items.
No, Penfield's
is the
completely
second item.
understandable, but we have fewer people buying buying beach stickers, and
Daily passes.
is that what that is?
I don't know, but there's
I
daily
don't know,
passes.
I mean, it just seems like it's a large number to be down for something that receives great use.
Yeah, other than checking with Mr. Lombardo on what his reason for estimating it down is, I'm not sure. The beach sticker revenue, parking revenue that's up, I would think would be the daily parking.
How long
The
were the
other ones-
beaches closed, Mike?
Excuse me?
Were the beach closed for a certain period of time? Did you guys close them down because you didn't want people accessing the
The
beach?
stickers are only good from Memorial Day to Labor
Right,
Day.
so-
I don't believe they were closed during that period.
So we'll be
The
selling a
daily
batch.
parking would only be done during that same period. So that perhaps needs an explanation. Certainly, the golf course revenue, Storm Sandy took out November, and
Is it possible that Mr. Lombardo anticipates fewer beach stickers being sold because Penfield's going to be offline until next January?
I think that would be a good question for us to ask him.
And the 130, it'd be interesting to understand why people aren't playing golf.
Yeah. Well, no.
Again, that's Storm Sandy.
Storm Sandy, yeah. I mean, 90% of this, I was a little surprised. We sat down and we spent a couple hours, more than once, with Mr. Lombardo, going through his numbers, and him explaining to us, and us explaining, and going over, the munis reports, et cetera. The one that surprised me was the parking revenue is up, but it's up. But the others are pretty much storm-related. People
Okay.
didn't play golf because of the storms.
So, but
It's
Sandy hit
down.
in late
October 29th.
And the golf courses were open until when? Late November?
Later than that, typically.
Later than, okay,
See,
fine.
what you're doing is you're judging it against typically, because that's the budget and the plan.
Mm-hmm.
A year ago, the golf course was open into December, and we actually had a positive run at the end, and in fact, the golf course ran some promos to get some extra dollars in at the end of the year to make up for Irene earlier in the year. So we had kind of a balancing out effect there.
So that 130 then is lost because of the lost use for the month of November, till
Yeah,
the time we
It's heavily
closed it.
weighted towards weekends, so even though Storm Sandy hit on Monday night, there wasn't much golf being played that weekend, kind of leading into that. So it's really the number of weekends. And again, it's against what they planned, potentially, and
Instead of guessing,
Yep.
can we just go back, and I don't mean guessing, but let's go back and ask Mr. Lombardo to just say, hey, we presented to the Board of Finance that these numbers were going to be down. Can you just tell us why you think they're going to be down?
Yeah, he's
Through
told
the
us, and I
internship.
just don't. In fact, I wrote myself a note to get a paragraph on each of these, but
Yeah,
I
that'd be
said- but I
perfect.
just didn't have time, but I will
Yeah, no,
follow
that'd
through
be
on that
perfect.
note.
That'd be perfect.
I'm not being critical, it's just helpful to understand
right.
what
No,
drives the
it's-
numbers, just as the same as our prior discussion on the 687.
Yeah.
It's just when you're looking at numbers in a vacuum, it's hard to understand them, and then people either just sit there wondering or make assumptions that are incorrect.
Right, and it's the exact same to our discussion about, personnel
Mm-hmm,
during the storms.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
you don't know without having the context as to whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. You're just looking at numbers on a page.
Yeah, as I indicated, had I had time, I would have gotten a paragraph for each of these, just didn't have time. But I will follow through with that effort and just forward it to the members of the board.
Right. And so the net is, you think we're within $500,000 of where we thought we'd be with the budget last year, given all these ins and outs, including the use of a significant portion of the bond premium in the current year,
Right.
and $500,000 on a 250 some odd million dollar budget, right?
Today.
Right. Right. The only thing we can guarantee is when we're sitting here in August, this 513 is not going to be 513. It's going to be whatever that number is.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions, comments on this? And I meant what I said before, this is an inexact science in the best of times. It's a very inexact science when you're dealing with several storms, federal reimbursements.
Oh, yeah,
And-
we have Sandy, we have Nemo, we have union contracts.
Right.
We have the money we're making up for the RTM cut to the contingency. Some people are looking at 4 layers of activity in their departmental accounts.
Right. All right. What's the next report we should go to?
What we then prepared was the fund balance analysis, updating it with this information. Which shows that And to tell you the truth, I don't know which one of these numbers the rating agencies focus on.
Now I
the
feel
budgetary
comfortable.
basis or the gap basis, but I assume both. As you can see, if this comes to fruition, these numbers, then we would, at the end of fiscal year 13, have, on the budgetary basis, 5.73 unassigned fund balance percent to expenditures, and then given the current $675,000 contribution to surplus in the budget as it now stands before the RTM, that would increase to 5.81%.
Okay, does anybody have any questions, comments on this? I think now is as good a time as any then to bring up a topic that's been a kind of a discussion for this board and ask if you guys want to do something. It's come to our attention through a variety of conversations that there's been discussions happening at the RTM level regarding fiscal year 2014 budget and the additional contribution that this board has approved towards a surplus for 2014, right? So there was last year, for the first time in a long time, I think, we actually approved a specific contribution to the surplus of $500,000. Then the first selectman in his original budget brought forth a contribution to the surplus. It was either $925 or $950. It was $925, right? Then the Board of Selectmen, as they were going through and reducing expenses due to better information, primarily due to medical care costs and things like that, reduced that recommended contribution to the surplus by how much? I can't recall off the top. $250,000. So we were still incrementally improving it year over year, right?
That's 925 minus the 250 is the 675 that's utilized in this analysis.
Right. So this 675 that's in this analysis shows that we're making marginal improvements, right, on both a GAAP basis and a budgetary basis relative to the fund balance. So the fund balance, where it was starting out at the low fives, is now getting towards the mid to high fives as a percentage of our operating budget, correct? Now, years ago, it was represented to this board that we were in trouble with the credit rating agencies, for lack of a better way to put it, because they were uncomfortable that the fund balance was low as a percentage of our budget relative to other AAA-rated communities. Fair statement? Right,
I
exactly.
think we got down to 3% or 3.85% or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But they had, originally, it was portrayed to us that we needed to get at least above 5, and kind of that was the marker. Then in subsequent conversations, it was actually laid out for us through the first selectman and through the administration that actually they were looking at closer to 10%, right, of fund balance as a percentage of budget. Now, you never want to be the leaders in this. You don't want to be ahead of the pack, right? But you don't want to be a significant laggard. So we've always talked about progressively stepping this up year after year to get it towards the 8 to 10%. In fact, I think, Caitlin, you might recall that I think the auditors actually said that one of the things that we should do at some point this year was an audit point, I think, was to actually set a policy as a fund balance policy as to where we want to be as a percentage of the budget. Isn't that correct? Mary, didn't that come to the audit committee? I think, yeah.
I think you're referring to the special revenue funds.
Special revenue, no, there was something about,
Fund balance policy that's in the CAFR.
yeah, there was something that they had indicated that we needed a specific one. There was some comment in the audit
It's on the
report.
special revenue funds.
Yeah. Yeah. Bottom line is, this board approved an additional contribution to the surplus so that we can continue to walk this up as a percentage of the budget, recognizing the fact that we were coming out of a period where we had a negative outlook, where we had a deficiency in the internal service fund balance, and where we were concerned about sliding back towards not having enough funds in the reserve accounts. In addition, there was some type of audit comment that I remember, I think others remember, related to a fund balance position. It's come to our attention collectively that there's been discussion on the RTM level, with the administration, I guess, of reducing that contribution to the surplus in the next, while they're deliberating the budget. And there's been discussion on this board, or actually commentary on this board, over whether we want to actually do a sense of the body motion to let the RTM know that, you know, whatever they're going to do with the budget, they're going to do. But we would specifically request that they not touch the contribution to surplus. And I want to throw that out there and get everybody's views on that and see what collectively this board wants to do. So sorry for the long preamble this evening, but does anybody have anything? Catherine, we'll start in this end of the table and we'll go. Bob, do you have anything you want to say?
I agree with you.
Okay. Catherine?
I would support that position as well.
Mr. Walsh?
No, I fully support it. We cannot go in that direction. I thought we were all committed. I thought the first selectman and the board of selectmen were committed to having that number go up, because we're supposed to be getting closer to 10%. So cutting anything further from it is going away from that and that commitment. So I think we've got to make the contribution the way it is.
Okay. Mr. Belita?
I agree wholeheartedly, and it just seems to me that if the credit rating agencies tell us that our fund balance is low, it might not be the best area to cut in the overall context of trying to find savings in this budget. I would hope that the RTM would do what we did, which was to go through each department line item by line item and find those cuts there, rather than taking this on. And if they can't find those cuts, then they ought to leave the budget alone and take responsibility for it. But to do this would be just fiscally irresponsible, in my opinion.
Mr. Brown?
I think you laid it out pretty well, Mr. Chairman, and I would support that motion, and I would hope the RTM, if they are considering reducing to $675,000, that they would reconsider, leave that alone, and do what Mr. Bolito said. Go from department to department and take a look at line items if they feel there needs to be a further deduction.
Mrs. Leclerc? Anything to add?
I don't have much to add, but I do believe that we need to add to this amount and that we shouldn't be cutting it.
Great. I do know I did have an exchange with Mr. Brockfeld. Not that I ever want to speak on somebody's behalf, but I think he's articulated to several of us that he believes that it's critical that we actually add to this as well. And I just say that because he was unable to be with us tonight and did relay that to me. To be clear, I haven't heard that the RTM is going to do this. I've heard it's a topic of discussion. I think they're actually doing a lot of hard work on this budget. I know that they've done a lot of research on this budget. I know that they've been holding meeting after meeting, I think, at this table. And I just know that this was a topic for discussion that I believe they had with the administration on what kind of leverage there was here, whether this was an area that they would look. I don't want to overstate the point, but I do want to state that this is one area that they've been looking at. And I think a sense of the body motion might be something that they would help let them know what our position is on it. Can I ask either one of my two legal eagles to draft something up quickly that we can vote on a sense of the body motion here?
Take a crack at it, and Mr. Walsh, you can edit me here. Okay.
Nothing like putting you guys on the spot.
Not at all.
Okay, go ahead.
You get our bill in the mail. Yeah. We could do something like this. We, the Board of Finance, make a motion or a statement that the current contribution to surplus of $675,000 be left intact by the RTM.
We would, how about if we ask, okay, do you want to make that motion, and then maybe I can amend it, or?
Sure. Well, Mr. Walsh, did you have, did I leave anything out? I wanted to keep it simple, but,
All right,
okay.
so,
Chicken.
yeah. How about something like, the Board of Finance would respectfully request that the RTM, Representative Town Meeting, leave intact the recommended contribution of $675,000 to the town surplus account in the fiscal year 2014 budget, whereas the town is trying to increase the fund balance relative to the overall budgeted amount in recognition of past issues with credit rating agencies related to that fund balance.
I'll second that.
So, does anybody have anything? Do you have that all written down? Because I couldn't.
It's on tape, and I'll get the tape.
Great, because I couldn't say that again if you paid me.
I got, we respectfully request. I've got the rest here, but I'll get it all.
Does that work for everybody? Does that work? Okay, so all in favor of this motion? Opposed? Abstentions? That motion carries, and we'll communicate that out. Deb, if you can, see if you can write that down and email it to me, and I'll share that with the RTM on our behalf. And I'll copy everybody on that. And Caitlin, I'll of course copy you. Any other questions, comments on the fund balance at this point? Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor. Sorry I hijacked the meeting, but
No, that's appropriate. You guys want to slide into the Internal Service Fund?
sure. Can we take a 5-minute recess, and we'll
Sure.
do then we'll do the Internal Service Fund? Internal Service Fund? Thanks. Great. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Let's go to the Internal Service Fund.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. You have 2 pieces of paper, 2 pages. The first page is projected through June 30, 13. The second page projected to 2014.
Yep.
Just, a little bit of way of explanation, because every time I look at this every 3 months, I got to remember what it means. So I'm figuring maybe I'm not the only one, so I'm going to go through it a little bit, okay? Okay, the top line is fund balance accrual basis. That is basically a number that represents the total assets minus the total liabilities. So in this situation, if you go to the number on the far right, at June 30, 2012, our liabilities, what we owed people based upon the IBNRs, the workers' comp, et cetera, we were at a negative $4,629,000. Then obviously the revenues is the town premiums, employee premiums, interest, other. We got a total of $40 million in revenue, and we're anticipating at this time through March, it'll change when we get through April, with total expenditures of $38 million for a total profit, total excess of revenues over expenses contemplated for the year of $2 million. That $2 million then gets deducted from the $4.6 million up above, which then means that our year-end balance would be $2.5 million. That's the again, it's not the IBNR, it's not the accrual, it is the total assets minus the total liabilities.
And this is a significant improvement over the last projection that we saw for the end of the year.
Yes, because as you know from following the budget, we have made about $3.3 million adjustments to the budget, both town and Board of Ed side, and those have flowed through to this document since the initial budget. And that is made up of the 2 bottom line items, the 11,320,000, that's the total of what we owe, and the 8,800,000 is the total of the assets, cash and investments. So then it is that third number from the bottom, the 2516, which now is the fund balance, the number on the bottom line in the GAF, the assets minus liabilities, that carries over to the top of the next page. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this page, because this is the page. So the first page is what we're saying is, and I think we'll be very calm. We have 3 months to go, obviously. We have to do the, recalculate the reserve for workers' comp. The workers' comp experience actually has been, it's too early to really carry it through into the reserve, but it's been looking good. Both the workers' comp and it's not in this account, but the heart and hypertension as well. So I'm confident we'll definitely have an improvement this year. So we start the next year at the 2516. Now, one item that's in this document is, as you know, we've gone out to bid. So if I want to focus on the Board for healthcare costs, I want to focus on the Board of Ed side. The number on the Board of Ed side includes, let me start up. Includes 100% of all potential savings. I'm going to use one of your words, Mr. Flynn, I think squishy. Was that the word you used? It includes the squishy costs as well. So if you wanted to adjust this number for where the budget now stands, okay, on the revenue side, the $18 million number at the top would be 19.3. And the expenses, if you actually realized 100% of those potential savings, then that would increase the the projected fund balance down there by that. That zero means that in the Board of Ed, given taking 100% of those savings into place, are actually the assets and the liabilities for that specific account would be would match. If you remember a couple of years ago, those assets were like $3 or $4 million greater. So they have used over time, used their assets to help pay for the expenses of the coverage.
What does the 18 represent then? You've lost me a little bit. It's been a good explanation. You lost me a little bit when you said that 18 million.
What this number represents, and right now there's the budget, the original budgeted number, which I think was 29,788,000 approximately.
That was the total revenue.
That was the
budget.
That was the total. Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, 29,788,000 was their total expenses. Okay, their total revenue, the Board of Ed operating budget request was 22,054,000. Okay. Now, what this schedule does is assumes, okay, now carrying those numbers for the current operating budget, if you take 100% of the costs in and adjust the revenues are, well, it would be what you see here. It'd be $18 million on the revenue side, and instead of 29,788 on the expense side, it'd be 26.5. Okay.
Okay, but
What I'm saying is that that's a representation of 100%, that this column, the way it stands, is a representation of taking 100% of the savings, even the squishy savings. What I'm saying is, if to adjust it for where the budget stands today, the Board of Finance approved budget. On the revenue side, that $18 million would be 19.3.
Okay, so essentially you're
They've already
saying,
taken out, they've taken out the squishy savings plus the improvement of the March experience savings.
so in essence, you're saying there's no, if we want to do no harm, there's no movement, additional movement in the Board of Education medical
If
costs,
you want to do no harm to the ISL fund balance,
then there's no movement
yes,
in additional savings in the
right,
medical costs for the Board of Education.
right. There's two different things. You got your ISL, got the Board of Ed budget, you got the town budget. Three
Right.
different things.
But the Board of Ed budget ties to this if it's at
Right.
19.3,
Right.
and you're saying at 19.3,
The 19.3, that would improve the bottom line number if they realize all those savings, the zero. The zero would become a 1,300,000.
well,
And then the 3,826 would be 2,526,
which is exactly,
which is very close to what we're anticipating it being at June 30, 2013.
so you're, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your recommendation to the RTM is any additional cut to the medical costs here would have a negative impact based on best available information to the internal service fund balance by the end of fiscal year 2014. If you approve the budget for this item, as it sits before you, as recommended by the Board of Finance, you would in essence be in the exact same position you are
I
today.
would maintain that, that reduction, that improvement over another year.
Right. So it would be no better and no worse than you think we're going to end the year at right now.
Right.
So in essence, you're saying stay with the number that's in the stay with the recommended number that's in the budget right now.
There's the 1.3, I certainly wouldn't touch 700,000 of it. And then you got the other 6, which, but if you wanted to maintain the integrity of the ISL, you would not take either of those amounts.
Any other questions, comments from board members on this item? And the betterment in the balance on the first page as of 2013, June 30th, 2013, is just based on better experience.
Yeah, I've looked briefly. I didn't have a lot of time, I'm afraid, to recalculate the workers' comp. I looked
Yep.
briefly at it, and it's looking good. I don't see any change there. But that's a weird number, as you know. It can be very volatile.
As of right now, best available information, that's good news year over year.
Correct. Yeah.
Any other comment? Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, the next item then is a calendar item. Mr. Tetra, do you want to come forward and help step us through this if you can? This is basically based on a request that I received from you, and this relates to next week's meeting. You recall earlier in the meeting, I put Mr. Dwyer on the spot and asked him to come up and speak to a couple of projects that they currently have before, or one project in particular they have before the Board of Selectmen, and I think another one that's coming quite quickly. So the one that you hear tomorrow is Ludlow, correct? Can you step us through what the issue is, please, and then we can go from there?
Simply put, the Ludlow building project, because it's more than just the windows that we've been hearing about for a long time, that's on the Board of Selectmen agenda. If that were passed by the Board of Selectmen, that would then come to the Board of Finance next week. Your meeting is on Tuesday. Unfortunately, Dr. Title cannot make Tuesday night because of a Board of Ed meeting. And he was asking if you would consider moving your meeting to Wednesday night that he could make.
So the question before us is...
And just to lay it out, if we go forward with Tuesday, Mr. Cullen would be here, and you'd have the support from the architect and Mr. Cullen. Dr. Title just wouldn't be able to join in.
And also, I'm presuming, Mr. Dwyer, it's a Board of Education meeting, right? So there'd be no representation from the Board of Education? Where are you guys meeting? Are you here? And where are we? Okay, so we're town hall. Okay. I don't know that that's going to help you with the vote.
How about a neutral set?
Okay, so, and obviously, this is all dependent upon whether your board passes this tomorrow or not.
Can
Yeah.
I correct my statement?
Yes.
This is student recognition.
So you're at Ludlow? Okay. So we can meet here.
Unless there's something else. There's going to be something else scheduled.
Can we check that, I mean, and confirm it one way or the other? I do recall we did have to move a meeting.
Well, this is all dependent also on the RTM stuff going through in one night?
Potentially.
Yeah,
So
good point.
it might make sense to move it to Wednesday anyways.
Yeah,
I
that's a good
should,
point.
in the interest of just planning, I should point out that the RTM is allowing public comment on Monday night for the first time in
Right.
recent history.
Okay, so to move this along, what are people doing next Wednesday night, and can we adjust our calendar to move our meeting till next Wednesday night?
I already booked the room over at Town Hall on Wednesday.
On Wednesday night?
I don't know if this room's available.
Okay. Does anybody have an issue? Mr. Stone, are you okay with that?
I'm good.
James?
I'm good.
Mrs. Leclerc?
I'm okay.
Okay, so we'll notice the meeting for next Wednesday night, regardless. And thank you for the point about the RTM meeting going 2 nights. I didn't even think about that.
Wednesday at the town hall.
Wednesday night, let's, to be determined. We'll let everybody know where it's going to be.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. First Selectman, I appreciate it. And Mr. Mayor, Ms. Bossy, Ms. Gardner, the finance staff that's here tonight, I want to thank you for your time and effort putting together the variance analysis and all the hard work. I know Mr. Mayor runs you around the maypole here to get things done. No, it's not an easy year, and it's not easy to know when you're going to come out when we have so many balls up in the air at any one time. So we appreciate the efforts on that. Anybody else? Anything else? Any communications that the board needs to cover? Seeing none, do I have a motion? Mr. Bolito, a second. Mr. Brown, all in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Abstentions? We're done, everybody. Good night. Thank you.